The Good Morning Britain sofa had seen thousands of guests over the years. Politicians defending scandals, celebrities weathering controversies. This morning, something felt different before a single question was even asked. Prince Harry sat between Susanna, Reid, and Ed Balls, and the studio atmosphere carried a tension the production team hadn't anticipated. Susanna had her notes ready. Harry had that particular stiffness of someone bracing for confrontation before any had actually occurred. Then Susanna asked why he'd actually come back to Britain. Not hostile, not aggressive, just direct, the way she'd questioned prime ministers and controversial figures for over a decade on this very sofa. What Harry said made Susanna's expression sharpen slightly. What Susanna said next, calm, measured, devastatingly precise, would dominate British breakfast television conversation for days, because Susanna Reid had spent years learning exactly how to extract truth from people determined to avoid it. And this morning, sitting across from a prince who'd spent years avoiding difficult questions, that skill was about to be tested in ways nobody watching expected. This is the interview Britain woke up to. Subscribe now, hit that notification bell, and let's see what happened. The Good Morning Britain studio had its usual early morning energy. Cameras warming up, the production team running through segments, Susanna Reid and Ed Balls reviewing their notes before the red light came on. This was appointment viewing for millions of Britons, the show that had defined ITV's breakfast hour for over a decade. Harry arrived precisely on schedule, security detail conspicuously visible, even for a breakfast television studio. He settled onto the sofa between the two presenters, offering handshakes that felt more obligatory than warm. "Prince Harry, welcome to Good Morning Britain." "Susanna, Ed, we're delighted to have you," Susanna continued. "Especially given you're actually here in London. That's news in itself." "I'm happy to be here." "Are you though?" Ed asked, genuine curiosity in his tone. "Because you haven't seemed particularly happy about Britain in recent years." "Let's start with the obvious question everyone's asking," Susanna said, settling into her interviewer posture. "Why are you actually here? Not the diary version. What's the real reason for this visit?" Harry's expression remained composed. "The Invictus Games countdown requires my presence." "The games aren't until 2027. That's still a year away. You're here considerably earlier than the official schedule requires. What's the actual reason?" "There are various engagements throughout my time here." "Various engagements you're not specifying? That's rather vague for someone who's usually quite detailed about his humanitarian schedule. Is there something else bringing you back?" "I don't discuss my private itinerary." "Private itinerary on a public visit that's being extensively documented? That seems contradictory. What exactly requires privacy about scheduling?" "You're staying at a royal residence this time," Susanna continued. "That's significant. You've never accepted that invitation before. What changed?" "The family made the offer and we accepted." "They've apparently made this offer before, according to reporting. Why accept now specifically? What's different about this moment?" Harry shifted slightly. "Circumstances evolved appropriately." "Evolved how?" "You told the BBC last year you couldn't see bringing your family back given security concerns. Now you're staying in royal accommodation with full security. That's quite an evolution in a relatively short time." "Security arrangements were properly addressed." "By whom? The same institution you've criticized extensively? The same family you've accused of various failures? That security is suddenly adequate?" "There's a report just published," Susanna said, checking her notes, "suggesting you're the target of multiple terror plots, 6 specifically, according to a confidential security assessment. Does that concern you about this visit?" Harry's composure flickered. "Security is always a consideration." "Always a consideration? Yet you're staying in less secure private accommodation part of the time, despite these specific threats. That seems like a significant risk given what's been reported." "I trust the arrangements that have been made." "Do you?" Because your own security team apparently pushed for a full risk management board review before this trip, and it's unclear whether that actually happened. Are you confident in your safety here? Ed interjected gently. Perhaps we should move to lighter topics. These are legitimate safety questions, Susanna said. If there are genuine threats, the public deserves to understand how they're being managed. Your father, Susanna said, shifting focus. King Charles. You're actually in the country now, staying in royal accommodation. Have you spent meaningful time with him? We've had appropriate interactions. Appropriate interactions? That's rather clinical language for describing time with your own father, especially given his health history. Can you be more specific? I won't detail private family time. You've detailed extensively private family matters in books, documentaries, interviews. Why is specific information about seeing your father suddenly off limits? Some things remain private regardless of previous disclosures. Selective privacy, then. You share what serves your narrative and protect what might complicate it. That's not really privacy, that's strategic management. Let me ask about your children, Susanna continued. Archie and Lilibet are here, but reports suggest they won't be attending any public events. Why the continued secrecy around them specifically? We protect our children from unnecessary exposure. Unnecessary exposure to what? They're in Britain, staying at a royal residence, part of a significant family visit. Surely some public acknowledgement would be appropriate given the historical significance. Their childhood shouldn't be a public spectacle. Yet you've included them in Netflix documentaries, in various interviews, in your book. The spectacle exists, you've simply controlled its presentation. Isn't that just curation rather than actual protection? Harry's jaw tightened visibly. You're mischaracterizing our approach to parenting. I'm asking you to explain the apparent contradiction. That's not mischaracterization, that's basic interview practice. There's also this soyad, this surname question, Susanna said, pronouncing it carefully. Reports suggesting you're considering changing your children's surname to Spencer, your mother's maiden name, due to passport processing delays. Is that accurate? Harry's expression shifted to something more guarded. Administrative matters are being handled appropriately. That's not actually answering whether you're considering the name change. Are you frustrated with how the palace has handled your children's documentation? There have been delays that required creative solutions. Creative solutions like abandoning the Sussex name entirely? That would be a significant statement about your relationship with the institution. Is that genuinely being considered? I won't comment on speculation. It's not entirely speculation if multiple sources are reporting consistent information. Either confirm or deny. Is the surname change being considered? Harry remained silent, his expression hardening. The divorce rumors, Susanna pressed forward. They've been persistent for months now. What's your response to these ongoing reports about your marriage? Tabloid fabrication with no substance. Fabrication that required formal denial from your representatives. Most stable marriages don't generate this level of sustained speculation without some underlying tension. What's actually happening? Our marriage remains solid. Then why the continuous need for correction? Simple denials usually suffice once. This has required repeated addressing over an extended period. Media persistence doesn't indicate truth. Media persistence often indicates newsworthiness, which sometimes correlates with accuracy. I'm not claiming certainty either way. I'm asking for genuine clarity, which you're not providing. Ed tried to lighten the mood. Perhaps we could discuss something less contentious. Your work with Invictus has been genuinely impressive. I appreciate that, Ed, Harry said, visibly relieved by the shift. But Susanna wasn't finished. We can return to Invictus, certainly. But first, I want to understand something. You've criticized British media extensively. You've criticized the royal institution extensively. You've criticized aspects of British culture and society. Yet you're here, staying in royal accommodation, seeking positive coverage from British media. How do you reconcile that? I've never criticized Britain itself. You've criticized virtually every British institution associated with your upbringing. The monarchy, the press, aspects of governmental security decisions. That's substantial criticism of British establishment structures. Now you want cooperation from those same structures. That seems contradictory. You're twisting my previous statements, Harry said, his voice carrying an edge now. I'm citing your previous statements. There's a significant difference between twisting and quoting. Your own words, documented extensively, create this apparent contradiction. I'm simply asking you to address it. My criticism was specific and warranted. Warranted according to your perspective, certainly. But specificity doesn't change the pattern. Consistent criticism of British institutions, followed by seeking their continued cooperation and hospitality. That's worth examining. You clearly have a predetermined narrative here. I have documented facts and reasonable questions. If those create an uncomfortable narrative, that discomfort exists in the contradiction itself, not in my questioning of it. I came here expecting fair treatment, Harry said, his composure clearly strained. This is fair treatment. Fair means asking legitimate questions about legitimate contradictions. It doesn't mean accepting whatever narrative you present without examination. That's not journalism. That's stenography. Every question has felt like an attack. Every question has been direct. There's a difference between attack and directness that I think you're conflating because you're uncomfortable with the specificity being requested. Ed attempted intervention again. Perhaps we're being slightly too... I'm being appropriately thorough, Susanna said firmly. This is Good Morning Britain. We ask direct questions of everyone who sits on this sofa, including prime ministers and controversial public figures. Prince Harry isn't exempt from that standard. I don't have to sit here and be interrogated, Harry said, shifting in his seat. You don't have to sit here at all. You chose this interview. You chose this format. Walking away from direct questions doesn't invalidate them. It simply confirms you're unprepared to address them honestly. This entire segment has been hostile from the beginning. This entire segment has been consistent with how we treat every guest who sits on this sofa. The hostility you're perceiving exists because you're accustomed to interviews that don't challenge your presented narrative. This one has, and that discomfort is producing your reaction. Harry stood up abruptly. I won't continue this. That's certainly your prerogative, Susanna said, remaining composed. But leaving doesn't answer the questions Britain is actually asking. Why the surname consideration? What's the actual relationship with your father? Why the contradiction between criticism and continued engagement with British institutions? Those questions remain, regardless of whether you're present to address them. You've been deliberately provocative. I've been deliberately thorough. Provocation implies intent to upset rather than intent to inform. My intent has been entirely the latter. Britain deserves clarity about someone who continues occupying significant public attention while remaining evasive about basic contradictions in his own story. Harry moved toward the studio exit. History will show who was reasonable here. Susanna's response was calm, measured, final. History will show a prince who couldn't answer basic questions about his own well-documented contradictions on live breakfast television. That's not reasonable avoidance. That's simply avoidance. The distinction matters. Harry left. The studio fell into a brief, stunned silence. Ed finally spoke. Well, that wasn't quite the segment we planned. Susanna turned to address the camera directly. I want to be clear about what just happened. Every question I asked was legitimate, documented, and directly relevant to ongoing public interest in Prince Harry's circumstances. The surname question, the security concerns, the contradiction between his criticism of British institutions and his continued reliance on them. These aren't invented controversies. They're existing public questions that deserved direct answers. She paused, gathering her thoughts. What we witnessed instead was someone unable to engage with reasonable scrutiny. That's revealing in itself. Prime ministers have sat on this sofa and answered harder questions without walking away. Business leaders facing genuine scandal have stayed and addressed difficult topics. A prince couldn't handle straightforward questions about his own public statements. Ed added his perspective. I tried to smooth things over a few times, genuinely hoping we could have a more constructive conversation. But every attempt at de-escalation just seemed to create space for him to avoid rather than engage. That's exactly right, Susanna said. Kindness and space don't help if someone's fundamental strategy is avoidance rather than honesty. Sometimes direct questions, however uncomfortable, are actually the more respectful approach. They treat someone as capable of handling adult conversation, rather than needing to be protected from basic accountability. She straightened in her chair. I have immense respect for what Invictus has accomplished for wounded veterans. That work matters enormously. But respecting good work doesn't mean exempting someone from reasonable questions about entirely separate aspects of their public life and statements. The footage aired that morning. ITV made no edits. The clips that spread captured the confrontation. That's not really privacy, that's strategic management. Either confirm or deny. Is the surname change being considered? That's not attack, that's directness. Walking away doesn't answer the questions Britain is actually asking. History will show a prince who couldn't answer basic questions about his own well-documented contradictions. That's not reasonable avoidance, that's simply avoidance. Harry's team released a statement calling the interview an ambush characterized by hostile questioning inappropriate for morning television. Susanna addressed the criticism directly the following day. Ambush suggests deception about the format or intent. Everyone who appears on Good Morning Britain understands we ask direct questions about relevant public matters. The surname speculation, the security concerns, the contradictions in his public statements, these were all previously reported facts I simply asked him to address directly. That's not ambush. That's basic journalism. She added, I've interviewed prime ministers facing genuine political crises who managed to stay and engage. A member of a family that spent generations training for public scrutiny couldn't handle 15 minutes of direct questions. That contrast speaks for itself. For Susanna Reid, the interview became another demonstration of what over a decade hosting British breakfast television had taught her. The ability to maintain composure and precision while asking questions that mattered, regardless of the guest's discomfort. For Prince Harry, it was particularly damaging. Good Morning Britain wasn't hostile international press, it was British breakfast television. Familiar territory, supposedly friendly ground for someone claiming to want reconciliation with his home country. Being unable to navigate straightforward questions from Susanna Reid, walking out on live morning television, exposed contradictions no publicist could fully manage afterward. But for the millions watching their breakfast television that morning, something else emerged. The contrast between Susanna's calm, persistent professionalism and Harry's escalating discomfort with basic accountability told its own story. Susanna asked about his surname considerations. Harry deflected. Susanna asked about his father. Harry offered vague generalities. Susanna asked him to reconcile his criticism with his continued reliance on British institutions. Harry walked out entirely. And in that departure, in that inability to simply answer direct questions about his own well-documented circumstances, everything anyone needed to know about the gap between narrative and accountability became impossible to ignore. Some people can handle direct questions with grace. Others prove they have no genuine answers at all. Susanna offered straightforward professional journalism. Harry couldn't withstand it. British breakfast television had asked the questions Britain actually wanted answered. Harry chose departure over honesty. That's the whole story. Over a decade of British breakfast television, prime ministers who stayed and answered harder questions, and a prince couldn't handle 15 minutes of direct accountability. What does that tell you about the difference between narrative and truth? If you want more content that recognizes when directness reveals what deflection couldn't, subscribe, turn on notifications, drop a like, share this with someone. They need to see what happens when basic questions become unbearable. More directness, more clarity, more of what a decade of breakfast television teaches you about separating narrative from truth. Stay with us.